Have you ever noticed how some arguments seem to end but never really finish? The conversation stops and there is an eerie silence in the house. Life moves on, but something quietly remains. It's not the anger or resentment, it's just a little more distance than there was before. And if you've ever experienced that, stay with me. I want to leave you with 3 small actions that might help change the way you think about conflict in a relationship. Today I'll tell you a story about a couple I'll call Daniel and Rebecca. They've been married for a few years. They love each other deeply and have built their lives together. They are raising children and managing responsibilities whilst trying to make everything work. And like most couples, they don't argue every day, but now and then something small becomes something bigger. And one evening it started with something completely ordinary. A forgotten errand and a missed message. Something neither of them would remember a week later. But the conversation quickly changed direction. Rebecca, she tried to explain why she was upset, and Daniel immediately began to explain why he wasn't wrong. Rebecca felt unheard, Daniel felt misunderstood. And before long, they were no longer talking about the original issue. They were talking about who remembered what, who said what, who did more. Now the argument ended. Neither of them shouted, neither of them stormed out, but neither of them felt closer either. And I think this is where something important begins to reveal itself. Sometimes the goal of a conversation quietly changes. It stops becoming about understanding each other and starts becoming about winning. Not because either person intends for that to happen, but because being understood feels important. And when we don't feel understood, we naturally begin building our case and explain our position to prove our point. And before we realize it, the other person standing in front of us begins to feel less like a spouse and more like an opponent. And this is what it quietly costs. The issue gets discussed, but the person gets missed. And over time, arguments that were meant to solve a problem begins creating distance instead. Not because the relationship lacks love, but perhaps because both people are trying so hard to be understood that neither person is truly listening. A few days after the argument, Daniel was sitting in the living room. The disagreement itself had long passed, but something stayed with him. Rebecca was folding the laundry, the children were asleep, and the house was finally quiet. And for the first time, Daniel wasn't replaying the argument. He wasn't thinking about what she had said. Instead, he noticed something else. He started to notice how tired she looked, how much she had been carrying, and how hard Rebecca had been trying. And suddenly, the argument looked different. Not because his position changed, but because he stopped seeing a problem to solve and started seeing a person he loved. And I think that shift changes everything. Because there is a difference between listening to respond and listening to understand. One protects your position, the other, it protects your relationship. Now there's a moment in the gospel that comes to mind here. You see, again and again, people approach Christ carrying labels. The tax collector, the sinner, the blind man, the adulterer. Everyone around them sees the category. But Christ, he sees the person. He looks beyond the behavior and notices the heart. And perhaps that's one of the invitations of marriage too. Not simply hearing the words your spouse is saying, but seeing the person behind them. The fears, the disappointments, the hopes, the things they don't always know how to express. Because often what sounds like frustration is really hurt. And what sounds like criticisms is actually longing. And what sounds like anger is often the desire to be understood. So how do we deal with these things? Well, here are 3 things you can try. First, during your next disagreement, pause long enough to ask yourself, what is my goal right now? Is it to understand my spouse or is it to win the argument? That question alone can change the direction of the conversation that's happening. Second, before responding, try reflecting on what your spouse is actually saying. Not your interpretation or understanding, but their actual words. I mean, you can try something like, what I hear you say is, and then say what you've heard. Because people become far less defensive when they feel genuinely heard. And third, make a habit of looking beyond the argument. Ask yourself, what might my spouse be carrying that I can't immediately see? Because the issue in front of you is rarely the whole story. There might be something beneath that perhaps only you can help with. And coming back to Daniel and Rebecca, well, they haven't stopped disagreeing. No marriage works that way. But recently, they've become more aware of what happens inside those difficult conversations. Daniel has started listening a little longer before defending himself. And Rebecca, she has started expressing what she's feeling before frustration builds. And slowly, their conversations have become less about proving a point and more about understanding each other. Not perfectly, not every time, but enough to create a little more space for love. You see, the healthiest marriages are not the ones with the fewer disagreements. They are the ones where both people remember that they are on the same team. And perhaps that's worth remembering for the next time conflict finds a way into your home. Because the breakthrough doesn't happen when somebody wins the argument. It happens when somebody finally sees the person standing in front of them. Take that thought with you, and if you know a couple who may need this reminder, perhaps share this reflection with them. And before I go, a quick note. My first book, Scams Unmasked, is now available on Amazon and through select bookstores. If you enjoy thoughtful, story-driven explorations of human behavior, trust and decision-making, have a look at this. I'll leave a link in the description below. Well, I'll see you in the next one. Until then, cheers and God bless.